Welcome, everyone. We are so excited for this conversation on for-purpose entrepreneurship. I'm Casey Vanderstricht, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Nargis Baniasadi, who will introduce herself in short order. But today, our topic is about purpose-driven leadership and personal development. In this case, and in this conversation, we'll work through the foundations of entrepreneurship, leadership, personal mission and values driven by self-awareness and reflection. And we've spent a lot of time in the previous conversations walking through the tactics of what it means to build a purposeful enterprise. But before the tactics come into play, it's actually the personal journey that's most important to setting the stage. So with that, Nargis, I'll pass you the mic and you can give us a little sense of your personal journey.
Thank you, Casey. Yes, I'm very excited about our webinar and podcast today. As you said, we spend a lot of time talking about organization building, legal, ownership, finance, and today we are going to the topic of personal journey and leadership. At the heart of every entrepreneurial story, there's the founder, and the founder personal journey is very important to all of us because of many reasons. One reason is that the trajectory and the destination of the organization that founders build is very much depending on their leadership capacity and personal growth, but also because the many founders, speaking from experience and like what I have experienced myself and learned from many other founders, is that they embark on this journey because they want to have a very fulfilling and rewarding experience and career. And in fact, the experience of entrepreneurship and building meaningful and purposeful organizations can be very transcendental and create a sense of belonging and fulfillment that is the best reward of actually the entrepreneurial journey. But founders can only achieve that if they are intentional with their own inner journey and personal growth as a leader, and also being intentional about the type of relationships, culture, and values they are creating with their team and colleagues. So today we want to talk about this very important topic, and we are very, very happy and grateful that we have two renowned leaders who have dedicated their lives and careers to this topic with us.
Thanks, Nargis. And we'll just jump right into the content. We encourage folks to continue to engage with us, send along questions, and let us know how we're doing along the way and how this work can be applicable to you. But we're really excited to welcome Professor Otto Sharmer to the conversation. Otto is a senior lecturer in the MIT Management Sloan School and co-founder of the Presencing Institute. He chairs the MIT Ideas Program for Cross-Sector Innovation and introduced the concept of presencing, learning from the emerging future, in his best-selling books, Theory U and Presence. Otto, we are so excited to have you and to have you join this conversation because your work has really set the table for some of these concepts that are, while maybe not new in the sense that personal journey and self-reflection have been a part of the human consciousness for maybe from the beginning of time, but the sort of intersection between that work and business is relatively new, and we're really excited to have you join us today. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So I think the right place to start is maybe to hear a little bit about your personal journey and how you came upon this body of work as a meaningful research set for you.
Sure. What brought me really here to MIT some 25 years ago was the systems dynamics and the systems thinking group here, specifically kind of back then the MIT Organizational Learning Center that Peter Senge and colleagues had been founding. And what I was always interested in is how to advance the field of systems thinking and systems change by more paying attention to the invisible dimension of social change, right? So, and I think Nargis was just using an interesting term in her introductory remarks, which is the founder's field, right? Because I think there is, and when I then did interviews with a bunch of founders and innovators, entrepreneurs, artists, creative people, people who actually created
Did you also lose Otto?
I did. But while we wait for him to come back, I think what's particularly interesting is where Otto's going of this, of there hasn't necessarily been a science-based way of looking at the research of personal development. We certainly have psychology and other efforts that are looking at sort of the human dimensions of this, but from a tactical perspective, how do you actually link the science of personal reflection to building businesses overall? And I think maybe while we've lost Otto, Nargis, does it make sense maybe to jump to Bo, and we can have Bo do an introduction, and we'll do the reverse? Let's do that. So
sure, I was on the mute.
Yeah, that's great. So we're also really excited to have Bo Shao join us today. And Nargis, I will let you introduce Bo.
Sure, of course. Very excited to have the conversation with my friend Bo Shao. Thank you, Bo, for taking the time joining us today. Bo is a serial entrepreneur, investor, and leader in conscious entrepreneurship. And maybe I let you, Bo, introduce yourself and tell our audience about your personal journey, how you got into this field, and what are you doing now?
Sure. So I'll talk my personal journey, maybe on the external side and internal side. The external side is sort of easier. That I was born in China, won lots of math competitions, a total geek, and then studied physics, and then started my first company when I was 29, and retired. Actually, I sold my company when I was 20. When I sold my company, I was 25. I retired when I was 29 after I sold my first company. And then actually that was one of my 4 or 5 companies I started, and then I became a venture capitalist maybe 14, 15 years ago, and the fund now is $7 billion or something, like one of the largest in China. And then 2 years ago, again, retired from that, so my second retirement, and then now I'm mostly a very focused on Evolve, which is focused on inner journey and consciousness, both from the philanthropic side as well as the venture side. And in the meantime, also I travel around the world and live with my kids in many different places, spent 10 years basically traveling around the world. So I've led so far, I've been very fortunate and grateful. I led a fruitful and rich life from the external side. But what I'm more grateful for is that from the internal side, it feels like my life has gotten richer, and that richness is more important to me than the external things. In fact, increasingly, it's driving this integration between my internal life and external manifestation, if you will. When I say manifestation, I mean how we show up in the world, and what kind of work we do, what kind of person we are, what kind of relationships we have, that increasingly intertwined. And I cannot imagine now living in this world without doing the inner work that I'm doing, continue to do today. And that's why I feel excited to talk to you guys about it. And if I were to sort of summarize with one word or with few words what the inner journey has been like for me, is really going from unconscious to conscious. And you might be surprised to hear that. It's like, what do you mean? As long as we're not in a coma, we're conscious, right? What I realized is that actually starting from, like, if I look back in my life, I was really living life more or less like a automaton, like a computer walking on a stick, and somebody wound me up, usually my parents and the society I grew up in, and then I just keep going, like, win the math competition, go to Harvard, excel in math, excel in physics, and work hard as an employee. Like it felt like I was just sort of going through life, including starting companies, really, or including joining a nonprofit board, as like, this is what I'm supposed to do, kind of thing. And up until I was 29, when I sold my first company, I didn't really, very seldom I was truly present in my life. And I think, I think Professor Otto might talk about presencing in here, and we might use the same word, but I think we make similar things, might not be exactly the same thing. It's like I wasn't really present. Like, of course, in mindfulness, people talk about eating a grape. You spend 5 minutes eating one grape, tasting every little thing of it. But actually, that's the extreme, right? But actually, there is I don't know if the people in the audience could feel like, if I right now feel my legs and arms right now, and just feeling settle into the body, then I'm actually here. Before I did that, my thoughts were somewhere else, or just thinking and whatever. It's not really quite being in the life as we are today. And too often, particularly intellectually oriented people identify with their thoughts so completely that we basically think the thoughts is us. And thoughts are us, or us, yeah. And but actually, really, it's not. And I'm increasingly learning that we are sort of beyond our thoughts. And some spiritual teachers said it beautifully, is that our mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. And unfortunately, for most people, for most of their life, the intellectual, analytical mind, the thinking mind, becomes the master. And we lose touch with a deeper awareness that's always here. And you wonder, why is that relevant to the life or the work or entrepreneurship, right? And for me, it's sort of everything, because like by being aware of who I am, where I am, sort of the deeper truth, then I could feel alive when I really do something. I don't know if a good question to ask oneself is always, what do I feel most alive doing? I don't ask the question, what's you're most passionate about? Because a lot of times passion can be influenced by society, by parents, by all sorts of things. Like, what is it you feel most alive doing? Could be very specific thing, not venture capital, not entrepreneurship, very specific. Like for me, for example, is like, I feel most alive that I could have an insight that I came up on my own, and then be able to share that insight with other people and help them in very specific ways. I can see concrete results as a result of my sharing that insight. 3 key ingredients for me. It's not just teaching, general teaching, it's having insight of my own, and then they can do something with it. That's why I enjoy being a board member of a venture capital, as a venture capitalist, because that's exactly what a good board member would do. So very, very specific, and I can structure my life so that I feel this kind of aliveness more often. And also, there's a sense of alignment between sort of the deeper nature of who I am with what I'm doing in the world. And the thing is, unless we are really aware and present, we don't really feel who we really are. We're just thinking and thinking and thinking. And how can you possibly actually figure out this alignment? I'm covering a lot of ground very quickly here because we don't have a lot of time. We can have to dig into further. And obviously, how to become present and aware, that's the big question. And it's not easy. And I will just say 2 words. One is cleaning up, and the other is waking up. And I won't go further into detail here. And if there are people who want to ask questions, I'll be happy to talk about it. But waking up to who we really are, and cleaning up of our accumulated barnacles that we got from our childhood and other life experiences. And both are really important prerequisites for me, is to become really aware.
Well,
so I'll stop here.
I'd like to ask you a follow-on question. I'm hearing some echo, but okay, it's better now. So I want to link it to the entrepreneur personal journey. Entrepreneurship imposes some challenges on this inner work because entrepreneurs get so busy because they are committed to deliver on so many fronts, and people are demanding their time, all the time. And so it imposes some challenges, but it also provides opportunities, because entrepreneurship, especially in the field we are talking about, purposeful entrepreneurship, it is a spiritual journey. You are going to go beyond yourself in serving others. So it is a very interesting dynamic. And my question for you is that how can entrepreneurs really take advantage of this once in a lifetime opportunity? Hopefully they can repeat it many times, but they are now in the midst of it. How can they take advantage of it to really live more fully, be better leaders, and serve their companies and communities, but also themselves? And related to that is that we hear, unfortunately, a lot in the social impact circles that people get burned out because they just are doing too much and they're so driven, and their lives become a bit one-dimensional. It becomes work, work, work. You know, the work might be amazing, but still, like, our life has all these different dimensions. And sometimes social entrepreneurs feel guilty if they spend time doing other things. So what does all of these things mean for you? What is your advice for the entrepreneurs?
Question. So many things I could say. Well, first of all, I'd say entrepreneurship, in my experience, it feels really busy, but ultimately the success of a company actually usually comes down to a few important decisions every day. You know, I think Jeff Bezos has said this is the same thing. I think is that really, if you look at it as an entrepreneur, like if you're, you know, the success ultimately is like every day you make a few important decisions. It's not that many. It's not 20, not 30. But to make these important decisions every day, you need to be in the right frame of mind. You cannot be driven by emotions, or if you're stressed, you know, and then start making wrong decisions, right? So first of all, I'll say that even for just very practical purposes, be able to be clear and aware of even your own mental state when you make a decision, and not when you're not triggered, when you're not sort of just simply reacting to a certain stimulus, is incredibly important. Second, on the issue of burnout, I would say that in my view, a lot of times even when we are in these social entrepreneur circles or trying to do good in the world, we sometimes still come out of a place of fear that if I don't do this, either I'm worthless and haven't made an impact on the world, or the world will somehow become terrible if I don't do this. And when we come out of a place of fear or shame, if I don't know, well, you know, I have too much money, I need to do something or whatever I need to do, like it doesn't lead to fulfillment, and often leads to burnout. But you know, in the traditional commercial world, coming out of fear usually leads to greed and making a lot of money for themselves and cannot stop. You got the billion, have to make 10 billion, 100 billion. But in the nonprofit or in the social entrepreneur space, it often comes to a place of burnout, because again, it's the same kind of a fear that drives a lot of actions versus the love. And love is not just, you know, love of, you know, the lovey-dovey kind of, you know, people think of love as romantic love. It's really loving oneself, loving the life we have. Is like, I have this to give to the world. How can I help the world? I mean, coming from that place of love is very different. I'll say one specific example. I was at a conversation with one of the entrepreneurs who was running one of the largest robotics, so industrial automation companies in the world, in China. And I asked him what is his vision. He said, I want to be number 1 or number 2 in the world in industrial automation. He may be number 3 or 4. He's already a public company worth a couple billion. And then we start talking a little bit more. I said, no, what else in your life that really you feel gravitate to? He said, well, you know, I really like to, when I have a lot of money, when I have time, she has a lot of money already, I want to go back to the village I came from, and I want to help my villagers be able to do what they want instead of being a farmer, or they realize they have no choice. Another thing I feel passionate about is I want to make sure my daughter is free, because I right now feel very stuck. I cannot let loose. I cannot dance. I want my daughter to be free to do what she wants to do. Then I made a comment to him, like, isn't this like all related? Like, you want to, everything's about freedom, right? Including the industrial automation, that he wants to free the workers from doing things that's boring and repetitive, right? And the daughter and the villagers where it came from. I saw his eyes light up. It's like, oh, yeah, this is what I'm feeling, but this is my life's mission, right? To bring freedom to the world. That's what I love to do. That's what I love to give to the world. Now, I haven't talked to him for years after this. I don't know whether he remembered this, but if you can actually really keep this at your core, you can imagine when you run a business, one thing is to be number one in the world. The other is to, I want to bring freedom to people. That's completely different. And in the second case, you don't care whether you're number one, number two, or number 10, right? As long as you're doing meaningful work. And that was the former one, most likely lead to burnout or greed.
Yeah. Thank you, Bo. It's very nice. You are talking about connecting to our deeper values, which usually arises from love. But we need to be in an environment that we feel safe. So those I think inner values get manifested versus the opposing, competing values of fear and competition and sense of survival and urgency, which we see be promoted in entrepreneurial circles quite a bit, unfortunately. I recall a conversation I had with an investor once when I was building my company, and he told me, Nargis, there are several things that are wrong with you. You can never be a good CEO. One is because you're not greedy enough. And second is because you think that your company should feel like home and be a safe environment, while I think it should be all about competition. So I'm happy he was wrong. But going back to the work you are doing, because the work you are doing at Evolve Foundation is very much related to that. You want to wake up people to their really inner calling and deepest inner values aligned with love and generosity. So can you tell us a little bit what you're doing at Evolve Foundation and how it is related to the conversation we have today?
Both a foundation as well as a venture firm. So I funded with 100 million initially with our own capital. And venture basically invests in companies that works in the inner world. It could be, and then the foundation gives grants, and for nonprofit. We don't really care whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, as long as scalable and rigorous and disciplined entrepreneurs running it. And all of them, it ranges depending. We really do the same thing, but I can use different words to describe it. On the simplest end, this could be inner well-being, mental health, inner well-being. That's the simplest, most secular way of understanding it. If you go a little bit more new agey, it will be personal growth and self-help, quote unquote. And then go further will be spirituality and understanding who we really are. And to me, they are one and the same thing. That all of them are really, movement toward understanding and being whole. Understanding of who we are and being whole and feeling whole. And I think that's not, there is enough in this world. There's too much external focus, too much material comfort focus, and which is all good, but there's a humongous lack of focus on who we are inside. And that's why there's such an epidemic of loneliness, epidemic of depression and anxiety. 1 out of 6 Americans on some kind of psychiatric medication, which is, when I heard for 1 out of 6, it's always shocking, right? So I thought it was 1 out of 60, 1 out of 6. It wasn't a misprint. So that's what sort of we are working on. I feel fortunate that I could really combine what I believe strongly inside of me and that the personal journey I have having to sort of discover and the process of discovering still of who I really am, and combine that with what we do in the world. And that to me is it's like increasingly there's no distinction between how I live versus how I work. And there's also very little distinction between, but increasingly meditation is not, I sit down on a cushion to meditate for 10, 15, 20 minutes a day or half an hour a day, whatnot. And then off the cushion, I do work and live. Increasingly, I feel that there's an integration where everything I do is it's indeed a meditation. Defined, I guess, always defined differently, not the sitting on the cushion meditation, but being present and being aware.
So, Bo, you directly help companies that are contributing to this field with their product and services that are accelerating consciousness and inner well-being in our world. But I know you also work closely with the CEOs of big companies globally, and you are helping them to transform and become more awake and be more compassionate towards themselves and their organizations and the world. Can you tell us also a little bit about this second work, and what have been the impact? What have you seen change both in the lives of those CEOs as well as in their companies and what they do for the world?
I think, yeah, we've been both working in China and the US, working with successful entrepreneurs, executives, and venture capitalists who have sort of made it, quote unquote. But many of them not really happy or truly satisfied. Actually, most of them are not truly happy or satisfied. And what I see the role we have is to bring spiritual teachers and other personal growth teachers who sort of stand the test of rigor. Because for me, I have a very high standard of sort of seeing bullshit and seeing too wishy-washy language, right? So I think we have been able to collect and be able to attract a group of teachers who really are combining the modern language as with the Asian tradition together with science, and bring them to these people, to these successful entrepreneurs, people in a position of power and influence, and also build a community where people can really feel comfortable to be authentic and real with each other, which is so rare for people now in those positions, right? So people feel incredibly tight, incredibly safe in this community, and then can grow together. My view is growing on your own is really difficult. If you're an entrepreneur, you already there's so many things you got to do to handle. Like, you lose perspective. You get sucked in to whatever's happening, right? And it's very powerful and alluring in the short term. What's happening in the real world all feel urgent. But when we have a group of people together and support each other and love each other, I mean, I use the word quite a lot these days, I guess. It feels very different, and we can encourage each other and enable us just to be able to listen to each other is also incredibly powerful. So we do a lot of that. That's been personally really, really gratifying to me to see people change. I mean, I don't have any attachment to how they should change or what they should do with their lives whatsoever. But what I discover is when people invariably, when they found themselves and actually found love for themselves, which is actually the most important thing in my view, is feeling compassion and love for oneself. And then everything else falls through. And too many of us have a deep kind of a guilt or a shame or some kind of a sense that we are incomplete or wrong. And when we go into the world with that kind of a view, no matter how deeply hidden it is, and maybe even subconscious, it doesn't do us much good. It doesn't do the world much good.
Thank you, Bo. Yeah, I recall a sentence that you said in one of your talks, that the amount of good that we can do for the world is limited by the inner growth that we have as a leader. So if I want to summarize the short conversation we had today, you talked about how if the leaders wake up to their inner drives that is aligned with compassion and love for themselves and others, they will live a happier life, most importantly, but also their organizations will be very different and much more impactful. And we also talked about the clarity of vision they gain that will help them with the most important decisions they need to make, and how having access to a community of practitioners and like-minded folks on a similar journey that are combining the impact in the world with their personal growth can be a very important resource and help to the founders. So maybe at this point it's good to transition to our next guest and then bring all of it together and hopefully have a conversation between you and Otto at the end. Thank you.
That's great. And thank you, Bo, for sharing that personal journey. It's something that's really helpful, I think, to hear when others have been through what others have been through, to be empathetic to that. So we appreciate you sharing that. And Otto, we're so excited to have you kind of pick up where you left off with just talking about your personal journey and your research. And let's start there.
Yeah, let me start with just really appreciating, Bo, your sharing your story. It was so wonderful to listen to that. And I think that's the much better order, kind of having you go first, so I can maybe build a little bit on some of the key dimensions that you mentioned. And, just to mention some of the things that really so much resonated from your remarks. Bo, mind is a wonderful servant and a terrible master. And then you focus on awareness, on the process of becoming aware, on the process of waking up, which is, in fact, kind of at the heart also of my own research and my own work. And then your response to the burnout question, right? So just remember kind of to move away from fear as an inner place that we operate from to love. And in other words, to shift the inner place from that we operate. And so that's really this, it reminds me of a conversation I had as part of my research in Paris with the late cognitive scientist Francesco Varela. And when I interviewed him the first time, and that was already in the shortly before he passed away in the late 90s, he talked about a blind spot of science, right? And he said, Western science really has a blind spot. And I asked him, what is that? And he said, it's experience. Everyone knows, everyone thinks they know about experience, and I claim we don't. So those were his words. And then I was really so surprised that many innovators and CEOs and executives related to that topic of the blind spot, right? The blind spot in Western science. So a few years later, I came back to Varela and asked him, well, I mean, that really resonated, your blind spot remarks with so many of the readers. Have you done any work on that? And he said, well, that's basically, it's the main question I have been focusing on in my work. And those were the last years of his work. He passed away shortly after, way too early. And he came up with 3 disciplines who actually did address that blind spot, which is psychological introspection, phenomenology, and meditation. And in his view, then, those 3 practices can be summarized by what he called 3 gestures of becoming aware. So that's kind of the inner work dimension. It's kind of double clicking on what you said, Bo, on awareness. How do we become aware and how do we really wake up? And according to Varela, so he would say that the 3 core dimensions are suspension, right? Suspending our habits of judgment. Number 2, redirection. Looking at something not just kind of from my angle, but from the viewpoint of another person, or from the viewpoint of source, right? How that came into being. And then number 3, letting go and letting come, which of course we all know, right? So whenever, as an entrepreneur, as a leader, whenever you go through a sequence of change, whenever you meet a moment of disruption, in essence, it's about letting go and letting come. Letting go of what is no longer essential for us, and letting come of what is wanting to emerge. And that really in a nutshell. So when I heard him describe that, I was really struck, because I knew in that moment that I had seen that process as at work many times before, which is when I was working with teams, when I was working with organizations, going through a sequence of profound change. And yet, what Varela did was describing this process in terms of, when you analyze the micro actions, when you go through a process of meditation, when you go through the phenomenological. So through a deepening, phenomenology is a word for deepening your own capacity to attend. And so that was really, that came to my mind. That was one thing that came to my mind, Bo, listening to you. And the other one is that your remarks really open up the whole other dimension of what entrepreneurship is all about, that there is an inner dimension, right? So we all are aware of the outer story of entrepreneurship and the outer story of change, and yet there is an interior dimension. And that's really also at the core of the work that I have been doing. And one of the first occasions when I woke up to that is in talking to the late CEO of Hanover Insurance, who after having gone through many periods of leading transformational change in his own organizations, summarized his own experience as a CEO with the words, "The success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener." So let me rephrase. The success of what I do as a change maker, as an entrepreneur, depends on the inner place from that I operate, which is exactly what you, Bo, shared with us with your response on burnout, right? You need to shift the inner place from that you operate from fear to love. And so the essence of Theory U really is about that interior dimension of leadership and of innovation and change and entrepreneurship. What I would say is, how I would summarize this field today is, it's about, when we look into current reality, when we see kind of what has been playing out here in the US and in other countries over the past 5 years, it's a lot of freeze reaction of the mind, heart, will, right? So it's not, as you were talking about, opening the mind, heart, will, AKA curiosity, compassion, and courage, but it's a freeze reaction of the mind, heart, and will, AKA ignorance, hate, and fear. And I think that's like the inner territory of leadership that to be effective with, we need tools, right? And we need kind of new learning environments that help us to activate our own agency, that we can navigate this territory. And a lot of that, so a practical example of that is listening, right? So a lot, I would say kind of this way of leading or making things happening by shifting the inner place of listening, the way you can differentiate superficial listening from deep listening can, in my view, be summarized with, I pay attention this way, therefore it emerges that way, right? So it's not like the old style, I think, therefore I am, Descartes, but it's like, I pay attention this way, therefore it emerges that way. So the way I pay attention to my situation is actually co-shaping how the situation or a conversation is unfolding. So, and that's why, is just double clicking, Bo, on what you said. Well, the inner place from where you take decisions is actually having a profound impact on the quality of decisions that you're taking. So in my own work then, listening to entrepreneurs and leaders and innovators, what I found is that the hidden story that you started revealing a little bit, Bo, with your remarks, has actually, when I also look at my own experience, there is a profound relationship how the founder relates to the future possibility that through his or her social enterprise is bringing into being. And this relationship, I've used the term field of the future, because in my experience, at the essence of every entrepreneur's story is not just, okay, I want to get rich and therefore I want to, I project just an idea out into the wall and now I make it happen. It's almost the opposite, kind of that I need to open up my deeper capacities of sensing. And that at the essence of entrepreneurship and leadership is the capacity to sense an emerging future possibility that wants to happen, that wants to manifest, but that stays in need of me to bring it into reality. So it is this kind of a very intimate relationship. And when you lead in a moment of disruption, which is pretty much the condition of this decade and this century, so when you lead in a situation of disruption, all the exterior navigation instruments stop really working well. And what you're left with is your own inner sense of possibility, how you can, so this connection to the field of the future, kind of the field of emerging future possibility that you can connect and get in resonance with. I think that's one of the stories that many entrepreneurs actually experience and many social entrepreneurs experience, and yet that they often don't realize themselves. So it's part of the experience, Bo, as you said, but we are not fully becoming aware of it, right? Even though it's very important for us. So what I wanted to do maybe with you all, and if you like, is to guide you through a little practice where you can apply this and maybe experience that a little bit in your own case. Because at the end of the day, any kind of knowledge we share here, if it doesn't make a difference for you, how you can operate after the session or even during the session, then it's not really helping. So that's, let me stop here. So I have a little practice. So it's very simple. The only tool you need is a pen and a piece of paper, right? So that's, you can also take a device, but recommended is actually pen and paper. And then we can go into that. But I want to stop here and maybe open up Casey or Bo or Nargis, any kind of comments from you or further reflections before we move into the practice.
I think it's really fun to see and to connect the tools that you're describing with the positive benefits of this type of self-reflection. And to me, that's what I think is so, to have the combination of Bo's personal experience and Otto, the repetition that you have, or the number of entrepreneurs that you've seen over the years that have experienced that, and to create those tools is really powerful. So I'm looking forward to participating and thinking a little bit about what an exercise might bring up.
Yeah. One reflection I had is also, a company is basically a structure for a series of conversations. So it's nothing more than that. So individuals coming together and organize themselves to have a lot of conversations. So what you are talking about, the generative listening and opening up to our inner drives, as well as like understanding others' inner journeys, is at the very, very heart of creating an organization. So really looking forward to do the exercise, and I like to then to ask practical questions after that.
All right. Very good. So let me preface kind of the practice with two little framing remarks. One is that I personally kind of from a presencing, so presencing is a word by which I mean it's a blend between sensing and presence. And what it means is the capacity to sense and actualize an emerging future possibility, which is in essence what you do as an entrepreneur. And so one of the underlying assumptions that I personally have is that each of us is not one, but two. So each of us is not only one human being, but two. One is the self with the small s, which is the person I am today. And the other one is the self with a capital S, which is the person I could be tomorrow. In other words, my highest future possibilities. And at the essence, really, of this deeper process, or you could say, to use Bo's words, the spiritual dimension of the entrepreneurial journey is a connection of these two selves, the small s self, the capital S self. So can we make them listen to each other? And that's kind of what this journaling process I'm going to walk you through is designed to do. And so the other upfront remarks, just a quote from another entrepreneur that I interviewed, Nick Hanna, who was is another serial entrepreneur. And he summarized his own work as an entrepreneur and social entrepreneur with the following words. He said, one of my favorite sayings attributed to Margaret Mead has always been, quote, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And then he comments on her quote, I totally believe it. You could do almost anything with just 5 people. With only one person, it's hard. But when you put that one person with 4 or 5 more, you have a force to contend with. I think that's what entrepreneurship is all about, creating that compelling vision and force. So what he is articulating is something that I have learned over the years that I would say I appreciate a lot more today than I did many years back. And it has to do with what I would call the power of intention. That a lot of what you do as an entrepreneur is actually clarifying your intention, which is not just something you project into the world, but it's a perceptive capacity. You sense into that. And that has to do with this field of the future. So those are the 2 upfront remarks. And now kind of the practice. So it's a journaling practice. And the trick about journaling is something very simple. You take the pen, you put it on paper, and you just start writing. So journaling is not, okay, let me think about a really smart idea. And once it's fully hatched in my head, I put it down on paper. No, that's not journaling. Journaling is I throw a question at you, and you put your pen on paper and you just start writing. You can number the response, but you can number the response you give, but you don't write down the question I ask. You just write down the response that's coming through your hand. So I will give you 6 questions and 1 minute approximately per question to just put down your thoughts. In fact, I will only use 5. So let's get it down to 5 questions. So the first question is a lot, coming back to the blind spot, right? So a lot of, I think, what we face in larger systems change today is that there have been stakeholder groups in the system we are operating that we are not paying attention to, right? So, for example, when we create CEO circles or people who made it and so on, so who is excluded? Who are the voices that are not part of that? So in the Black Lives Matter moment, right? So we all, in all institutions, we face these questions. Who are the voices that have been structurally excluded from this conversation that many of us, as the more privileged, are participating in? So that's number 1. So who are the voices in your system that you don't hear or that you don't pay attention to maybe sufficiently? So think about voices that somehow are more at the margin of your systems, and that if you paid attention to and if you empathized with, applied your loving attention to, could help you to really reconceive what you are doing. Because all of us know from a systems perspective, where does innovation come from? It comes from the margin. It never comes from the center. So when you truly listen to the margin of your own system, who are the voices that you need to pay more attention to? How can you get outside of your own bubble? That's another way of asking the same question.
And to just make sure we have enough time to finish, I think we should, Otto, let's pose the questions and then give folks just a minute to reflect, and then we'll have a few minutes to wrap up. So maybe we'll walk through the next couple of questions.
Yeah, I will give a little moment for each. So that's how the process works. Then number 2, So if your social enterprise were a living system or a person that could feel, what would that person feel? So imagine, so your attention is on creating or evolving a social enterprise. But if that was a living system, and if that living system, was like a person, right, that could feel, what would that being feel right now? So tune yourself into the feelings of that entrepreneurial field that you're in the midst of, that you try to be in service of. And just write down some of the feelings. And they can be very specific and very different. Joy, sadness, and so on and so on. Okay, just finish up writing down your the feelings that you sense in your own system. Number 3, if your social enterprise or larger system that you're working with were a living being that could speak, what would that being say to you now? So again, tune into that, the beingness of the field of the future that you're working with as an entrepreneur, and just write down, if that field of the future or that being could speak, what would it say to you now? Number 4, in the light of that, how would you clarify and articulate your highest intention? So what future do you try to create? And try to be specific. The more concrete, the possible. The more concrete, the better. So personally, relationally, in terms of the enterprise that you're creating, what future do you want to create? Just try to be specific in terms of the next few years ahead of you now. What future do you want to create? Okay, try to finish up in the next few moments. And then the last one is, so when you look at what you just wrote, the future that you want to create, any kind of, and maybe something that clarified in terms of your intention, micro actions. So what is it that you could do today or in the next 3 days that would put you on a path from thinking about the future to realizing it, right? Micro actions. Who would you give a call? Who would you send a message? Who would you make an appointment for a virtual or in-person coffee or dinner conversation? So what are micro actions you could take today or in the next 3 days that would put you on a path of realizing it. Those are the 5 questions. Hope they have been helpful for you. And that's obviously an exercise you can, build on or extend. You can use with your own team, and you can also use with a little bit more time. But usually it doesn't take too long.
I love wrapping up with the micro actions. I think that that's a really useful place to start because it's so tactical, and looking about what are the small things that I can change today that are the building blocks for the future. And that really resonated with me. So thank you for sharing those questions. I'm looking at the clock and recognizing that we wish we had much more time with both of you. Nargis, if you have a final question maybe for our guests, we could do that, and then we'll wrap up the conversation.
Yeah. Since we started a couple of minutes late, maybe we have 5 minutes, to wrap this up. I would just pose these final questions to both of our guests, and I love to hear their advice for practical things that entrepreneurs can do day to day, both in terms of their own personal reflection and journey and growth, as well as the conversations they can have with their colleagues, teams, stakeholders, customers. I think this exercise we did with Otto was wonderful and very helpful. And I hope founders can really take advantage of it. And what else we can do? What else, both you, maybe you can start by sharing your advice, especially reflecting after this exercise. What else founders and leaders can do in their own life as well as with their team members to be on this journey and lead a more intentional life and organization?
Advice is that I will look at my calendar, and typically I think entrepreneurs have 5 or 10 meetings a day. Can you hear me? Okay, and look at which of these meetings give you energy, like you feel energized after the meeting, and which of these meetings takes energy away from you. You feel de-energized after the meeting, and then to see whether over time you can shift higher and higher percentage of your meetings to ones that give you energy. And to shift those that don't give you energy, have somebody else do, whether it's a subordinate or a partner, or maybe that work that's not necessary. Look at closely, is that work really necessary? It's necessary to see if somebody else who is more fit for this work can do it. And the goal is to get 80%. If 80% of your things on your calendar are giving you energy, you're living a really good life. And also your company, I think, are more likely to be successful.
Okay, thank you. Otto, any reflections?
I love that. I think that's a great practice. I would say 3 things. One, pick a practice. So a practice is, Bo was alluding to that, right? You're 20, 25, 30 minutes in the morning. Most people do it in the morning. You can do it in the evening or midday. Like a practice where you basically move into a moment of stillness that allows you to tune into what's most essential for you and let go of all the noise that isn't. I mean, that's basically what it is. There are many ways of doing it. And you need to pick something that's working for you. That's different things for different people. What you do today is probably, what you might do today is probably different than what you might do in 5 or 10 years, right? So that's pick a practice is number 1. Number 2 is form a circle, because Bo mentioned that too. No one can do this stuff alone. You need actually, one of the biggest gifts that we can give to each other as human beings is actually our capacity to listening from a deeper place that Bo was talking about. If you listen to each other from a place of real support and love, loving attention, let's put it that way, you have a conversation in a small circle where you talk about the real issues you are facing, and you have like 2, 3, 4 others kind of who can attend to that from a real place of loving attention, you will have an experience that is actually supporting you not only during that session, but also in the times between these sessions. Just as the morning practice, if you have one, is not only supporting you during those 20, 25, or 30 minutes, but also for the remainder of the day. And there's many ways of how you can structure a circle practice. For example, in the Presencing Institute, we have a wonderful process called Case Connect process or solidarity circles. So there are many of these things out there. Doing it in a structured way really helps often to not be too casual. But if you develop such a circle, and the minimum size would be 2, right? If you have one other person you have these conversations with, that's already gold, right? That's gold right there. That's number 2, form a circle. And the third one is, I would say, do what you love and love what you do. So it's really getting to these 80%. And the love of doing really not only look at that from a commercial success, but look at that from the situation that we face as a larger system, which is that we are in a profound moment of disruption, that we run a global economy that's destroying the planet on which we depend. And that we have built economic systems that have been amplifying inequality that we haven't seen before. And that comes with all sorts of mental health issues that Bo was also talking about before. So we have these profound challenges at a level of scale never seen before. And we are the generation on this planet whose capacity to rise to the occasion and to innovate on the level of the systems, and not only on an individual level or entrepreneurship, normal entrepreneurship level, we have the possibility to be part of that story. And I think that's the call of our time. And that's also certainly a source of inspiration that I draw from in my work. And I think it's available to everyone. As, for example, Bo's story was also illuminating to us. Those would be my 3 suggestions.
That's amazing.
I think these suggestions are practical and also inspirational. So thank you.
Thank you, both of you. There's a lot to learn, and I hope our founders find this conversation very inspiring and helpful.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us, and we'll be checking in on each other as in our efforts to reach the 80%. My new objective. So nice to have everyone join this conversation. Thank you to the audience, and we will see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.